Introduction of Anthology of Magazine Verse for 1915. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Anthology of Magazine Verse for 1915 by William Stanley Braithwaite. Introduction. The Eternal Fragility of Poetry, an Analogue. The very name of April has a quiet mystery when spoken, as if at the sound of those soft and liquid letters some haunting memory begins to glow with indefinable ecstasies. The name leads one to sense a curious kind of secrecy, wherein some stirring and changing miracles are happening. It lures one into harmony with something intangibly but delightfully and poignantly strange. No month is named so appropriately. April is sound and color of the spirit and substance of earth. There is a pagan sensitiveness to grace and beauty in the naming. There is a vigorous moral courtesy in the reliance upon a name that is physically so frail. Yet it is the one month of all the year to which we apply the word eternal. It is a breath, a vision, a realization of immortality. In its constant fleetingness of moods, it symbolizes permanence. It is a spiritual flame, burning with prophecies and declarations, and its one message is life. That is why the spirit of poetry is so akin to the spirit of April. The April mood sanctifies the poet's dreams. He has come through them to realize the eternal grace that beats in the pulse of life. April typifies not so much resurrection as recurrence. The great rhythm and its discords is also a rhythm with its increasing harmonies, and it is the divine accent which April strikes that opens the vistas of an infinite and eternal conviction of life. This touch of mystery that comes creeping out of the shadow into the sunlight, transfiguring all with the motionless alchemy of breath and color and odor, evokes from poetry a similar touch of mystery that comes out of the shadows of human sorrow and pain into the joyousness of aspiration, a transfiguring power of faith, hope, and love, quickening the nature of man. That cry which Browning uttered is known all over the world. "Oh, to be in England, now that April's there!" There is something abiding in the knowledge that April makes England different from other times. Here is something that lies close to the meaning of poetry, and when Bliss Carman sings, "April over the Norland now bugles for rapture rouses pain," he calls, too, out of those deeps that lie just before the drifting silver haze, veiling meadow and hill, for a reading of the mystery that is full of the implications rooted in the human heart. Even though the larger part of mankind feels as Shakespeare voices it in the 98th sonnet, when proud pride, April, dressed in all his trim, hath put a spirit of youth in everything. The spirit of youth, in a deeper sense, becomes for the visioning soul of poetry a reaffirmation of our beliefs and ideals, which lead us through mysterious and difficult paths to the cherished perfecting of mortal conduct. Before the riotous blossoming of May, the serene intensity of April dawns and twilights prepare the sacraments, and poetry with her habiliment of dreams and visions carries the blessed bread and wine of life for the communion of supplicant humanity. Freedom of poetry as an art. Poetry has a way of being itself, despite the efforts from time to time to make it something else. A new condition comes about in the social order of things. There is either more or less satisfaction with life in the common masses of mankind. There is either more or less consideration of their rights and desires by authority and might, represented by government and wealth. But the essential meaning of life goes on from change to change in the social and economic world, with the single effect perhaps of intensifying the common and unchangeable experiences of human nature. No matter how the world changes, or the condition of man alters in keeping pace with it, poetry will be seen, if one looks at its history, as a whole and not in fragments, to antedate the spirit of change in the life of humanity. The progress of poetry has always been its prophecy. The progress of science has always been its discoveries. While science is astonishing a generation with its discoveries, poetry is already into the next unborn generation planting the seeds of its prophecies for science to harvest. We are coming upon an era of new poetry, so we are told. In my hasty satisfaction over the appreciation of poetry by a greater number of people to day than was true 10 or 15 years ago, I also have been guilty of calling this extended interest the admiration for a new art. Poetry never was old. It could never be new. It could never be set free because it was never in bondage. It is believed to be free because it expresses the feeling and moods, the aspiration and condition of the people. It is supposed to be new because it attempts to reform its appearance by repudiating tradition. 100 years ago, indeed we might go back 500 or 1,000 for examples, Shelley with one purpose in view, and Crabbe with another, voiced the people, the democracy of the masses, politically and socially, morally and industrially. And Wordsworth and Coleridge reformed the abstract appearance of poetry by revolting against tradition. The essence of poetry is in the mental and emotional image, and the vitality of the image to weather the usage of familiarity by reading generations is in the personalized spiritual force of the poet. These are what bring fire, heat, radiancy, and color into the smoldering fuel of the art. Life constantly offers new fuel, after periods of material exhaustion in the affairs of men, and poetry has always been ready as a continuous element in human nature to inflame it into prophetic messages of the future. Crabbe, Wordsworth, Shelley, and Coleridge did not create a new poetry. They created a new meaning, a new interpretation of truth. What was wholly and untraditionally new about their poetry was the magic by which their evocations of beauty gave substance to the abstract forms of truth in the vaporous regions of their souls. And you will find that only these two elements count, and that the subject does not matter, nor the mere condition or aspect of existence, through which life may be represented in substance and reproduced in texture. To repeat, the life of the people, or the life of the aristocracy, the life that is vulgar and oppressed, that is criminal or ignorant, as well as the life that idealizes virtue and morality, that is cultivated and noble, life that is past in antiquity and history, as well as the life we experience in our rapidly changing modern world, have all an equal chance to be made vivid and real, vital and actually manifest by the eternal embodiments of truth and beauty. With the new interest in poetry there is a growing controversial feeling, chiefly among the poets themselves and their critics, about the kinds of poetry. It is forgotten that kinds of poetry can only mean one thing, that is, the particular forms in which poets are best able to succeed in revealing moods and conveying ideas. It has everything to do with expression and nothing whatever with substance. If, therefore, a poet is attracted to the idealism of Greek and Roman myths, and uses the symbols of their characters, with their passions and language, instead of a direct utterance of the language of modern democracy, he may be given every credit for poetical perfection. He will be said by the passionate lovers of modernity to have truth and beauty in his work, but no pulse of life. It must be understood that the pulse of life beats in poetry not from the theme, but through the abstract realities of the poet's soul, breathing into the theme the inexplicable sentiency of being. The American substance. There is a peculiar weakness in most American writers when they speak of our poets. Often these writers are poets themselves. They seem to lack both independence and judgment. They belittle their own efforts by their injustices to their contemporaries. They contradict their own opinions, and confuse a public that is really trying to come to an understanding and appreciation of the best work our poets are doing. Miss Zoe Ekins, writing a series of articles this year under the title The Shadow of Parnassus, a critical anthology of contemporary American verse, makes the statement that we have no great or first-class poet in America today. Yet, in commenting upon the work of Winterberner and Amy Lowell, she characterizes the former's poem, The Cardinal's Garden, Villa Albani, as being as great as anything Browning achieved in any of his dramatic monologues. And Miss Lowell's poem, The Castle, she calls the most notable piece of narrative verse by any living poet. Certainly she would not deny that Browning is a great poet, and if Mr. Benner, according to her opinion, has done something equal to what only greatness can achieve, he must be a great poet too. But of course, being an American, the term has not the same meaning, as no American poet can be great. A different case, but a common one, and with less excuse, is the letter Mr. Conrad Aiken published in the New York Times Review of Books earlier in the year, in which he charged me with persistently and sometimes extravagantly overpraising the works of American poets. He at the same time commented on the achievements of the younger English poets, comparing the American poets to them, much to the latter's disadvantage. Now Mr. Aiken, as well as Miss Atkins, are American poets, and it is an unseemly manner they pursue, going about seeking their own self-effacement. In spite of this attitude, we have poets of the first rank, and perhaps for the first time poets, not a poet, whose Americanism has helped them to their high positions. The two great successes of the year, up to the writing of these paragraphs, have been the American poets Frost and Masters. Both are typically American, though one has an Eastern and the other a Western background. And I venture to predict that two other American poets with an indigenous American note will have impressed the public tremendously before another year. These poets are Lincoln Colcord and John G. Neihardt. Mr. Colcord has written, in my opinion, in his Vision of War, and looked at from more points of view than one, the most important book of the year, whether in prose or verse. Mr. Neihardt achieves in his remarkable narrative, The Song of Hugh Glass, an American theme which shows the possibilities of adventurous pioneer days in the West as a subject for poetry, if the poet has the power of form and imagination in the highest degree. This is a significant note in the development of the year's poetry, that America is yielding itself in unsuspected ways to the vision and imagination of her poets. The variety of the year's volume cannot help but convince the observer that American poetry is marching steadily forward. The exquisite singing quality of Sarah Teasdale in Rivers to the Sea, the democratic idealism of Winterberner in The New World, the emotional imagery of John Gould Fletcher in Irradiations, the intellectual beauty of Benjamin R.C. Lowell's The House That Was, the imaginative culture and spirit of Thomas Walsh in The Pilgrim Kings, the spiritual transfiguration of common experiences by Dana Burnett in Poems, and the delightful spontaneous humor of Arthur Guiterman in The Laughing Muse, are a few examples from many of the year's best accomplishment. The selections in this anthology also testify to the continued progress of the art in the magazines. Here are the older and established names represented by some of the best work they have done in recent years. Poets like Edwin Arlington Robinson, Amelia Josephine Burr, Josephine Preston Peabody, Amy Lowell, Vachel Lindsay, Brian Hooker, Louis Untermeyer, Olive Tilford Dargan, Robert Underwood Johnson, Florence Earle Coates, Wendell Phillips Stafford, Corrine Roosevelt Robinson, Witter Benner, Ridgely Torrance, and George Edward Woodbury. While the new discoveries of beautiful poems such as The Rare and Perfect, Peter Quince at the Clavier, by Wallace Stevens, the tender and appealing Heritage by Teresa V. Beard, the haunting lines of The Adventurer by Odell Shepard, the quiet spiritual glow of The Courtyard Pigeons by Caroline Giltinan, the firm meditative mood of Pax Beata by Mary Rachel Norris, the elegiac beauty of To Persephone Returning by Edith Willis Lynn, the exquisite melody of Song by Ruth Guthrie Harding, the delicate and attractive fancies of Needle Travel by Margaret French Patton, and the incomparable artifice of The New Platonus by Cuthbert Wright, present to us new names that have added gloriously to our choir. The year has returned with fervor to lyrical expression. There were considerably fewer long poems than last year, and amongst those that I have included, the splendid modern story of Gayheart, A Story of Defeat, by Dana Burnett, is unquestionably one of the best. I want to reaffirm my statement of 2 years ago concerning the sonnets of Mahlon Leonard Fisher. He is one of the very best sonnet writers in the entire history of American poetry, and the two here included, July and If One Should Come, are as good as any he has written. We are still looking forward to a volume by this poet which will definitely assert his place in the public mind. Another poet who has not yet published a volume, but whose work in the magazines of late shows her possessed of extraordinary visual and imaginative powers, is Ruth Comfort Mitchell. I believe that her work was definitely introduced to an appreciative public through the remarkable poem called The Sin Eater, which I included in the anthology for 1918. She is destined to go very far, for there is an original quality in her work that has all the marks of genius. A notable fact about the interest in poetry during the year is the increase of critical writing about contemporary poets and poetry. There is considerably more space given to the reviews of new books of verse, and writers like Louis Untermeyer in the Chicago Evening Post and Eunice Deschens in the Los Angeles Graphic have produced criticism of a brilliant and permanent character. On the other hand, I was surprised to learn that during the year a periodical like The Outlook gave practically no heed to the new volumes of poetry, publishing just one review through the entire 12 months, which dealt with 4 books of verse, one more than a year and a half old, and the other 3 over 6 months old. This is neither creditable nor inspiring from such a publication. The poet most written about during the year was Emile Verhaeren, the Belgian writer. This was, of course, due to the war, and deplorable as the circumstances may be, American readers were benefited by acquaintance with the splendid style and vigor of this writer. Another poet more written about than any others in this country, with the possible exception of Frost and Masters, was Rupert Brooke. Here again the war, this time more sadly, brought immortality to a name existing in comparative obscurity. But the death of Rupert Brooke was a sort of climax to his art. The experience of war brought out the best that was in him as a poet. There has been a great deal of sentimental and undiscriminating praise of Brooke. The best thing that has been written about him is Joyce Kilmer's judicious and correct estimate in the New York Times. Verhaeren, Brooke, Frost, and Masters have been largely the poetic topics of the year, around which has raged an animated discussion, pro and con, about the imagists inspired by Some Imagist Poets, an anthology published early in the spring. The conjunction of the imagists. Of the movement to which Amy Lowell, John Gould Fletcher, Richard Aldington, H.D., F.S. Flint, D.H. Lawrence, and many other poets both in England and America are identified, there is a great deal to be said, and a great deal has been said in their favor by English, French, and Russian reviews of the highest standing. After all, a name is only a convenient handle by which we carry the identification of things. You cannot isolate a force or degree of quality of feeling, because the shape and material of language is custom-made rather than ready-made. All poetry comes out of feeling. The degree to which feeling is personalized in images determines not the logic of form, but the measure of emotion and imagination which gets into the substance. It is on this basis that the poetry of Amy Lowell, John Gould Fletcher, F.S. Flint, and Richard Aldington must be judged. They believe that what they feel, experiencing life and observing nature, concerning the mystery and wonder of things, can be better reproduced for communication if certain artificial, misleading, and useless impediments of language are eliminated. This is not to say that there must not be any decoration, any more than to say that in abandoning, for the purpose, the rhythm of meters, rhythm cannot find any other laws of control. All really great poets have broken the traditional regularities of forms handed on to them by their predecessors. They found their genius could not achieve within the restrictions, and instead of adding to the mediocrity of the art, imposed technical obligations upon themselves which only the most rigorous and persistent labors could accomplish. This, it seems to me, is what the Imagists are doing. It is what Chaucer, Shakespeare, Coleridge, Blake, Poe, and Henley have done. And it is precisely the imagistic principle in the work of these poets I have just named which gives them a preeminent position in the art of English poetry. Whether the poetry of this modern Imagist group is great poetry is a matter with which we ought to have little concern at present. That it is good poetry can easily be proved. To prove it is all a matter of being able to demonstrate the difference between what is verse and what is poetry in their primary significance. All art is artifice, Arthur Symons once declared, and the scope of poetry is neither enlarged nor restricted by the range of subjects with which it deals. It depends entirely upon the force of symbols and words, reproducing upon the mind an impression corresponding in exactitude to the gradations of a state of being in objects or experience, and thereby presenting a reality. This is what Poe accomplished, whose telescopic imagination observed but a small space of the starry emotions of humanity. So if the Imagists in their poems show a vibratory sensitiveness to natural realities, and actually bring to us sensations of heat and light, of windy beaches, meadows, city streets, and leaves, it must be the result of an active imagination stimulated by the only force upon which it is dependent and interrelated, the emotional. But to say that the Imagists are only concerned in their poetry with natural objects is to disregard the human relations that are woven in the essential spirit of this external world. Writing in vers libre does not constitute the whole purpose of the Imagist poets. In fact, they have employed both regular rhythms and rhymes in their work. Whether employing the medium of vers libre or metre, they have shown, especially in a certain intensifying quality of mood, the first note of pure romanticism in English poetry of the last decade. The final test of poetry is its magic. It is not the feeling of contemplative anxiety, aroused by the philosophic or moral imagination, that gives to poetry its highest value as an art, but the agitated wonder awakened in the spirit of the reader by the sudden evocation of magic. This is the haunting quality of poetry, a thing that has no web of reasoning, and whose elements are so unaccountably mixed that no man has yet learned its secret. And in this poetry, as often as it is to be found in other verse of equal quality, there speaks that alluring voice whose secret is in the eternal and pure wizardry of Keats. Charmed magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas, in fairy lands forlorn. W.S.B. Feast of St. Francis of Assisi, 1915, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Acknowledgments. The existence of this volume, and the others in the series, those already published and the issues promised for the future, is due to the cooperative spirit of the poets, the editors and proprietors of the magazines, and the publishers working with me for the advancement and glory of American poetry. However large a success in circulation these volumes may attain, I wish the work to be regarded as an introduction to a large and variegated field of beauty to which it serves as the gateway. Enticed to the gateway by the examples I have gathered from the untrodden fields within, it is my desire and purpose, for which I have worked, that readers should enter in concourse and explore these rich fields for themselves. My labors have not been perfect, but they have been heavy, faithful, and enduring, and I hope not in vain. To the American poets, to the editors and proprietors of the magazines, in the summary, and from whose pages poems were selected for inclusion in the anthology, and to the publishers for permission to use poems which have, or shortly are, to appear in volumes by the poets chosen from the magazines, I wish to offer my hearty thanks for their courteous and willing help. One exception must be noted, to answer a question, and reaffirm my impartiality, that has been often asked me by poets, critics, librarians, and correspondents. That is, why I do not include the Atlantic Monthly in my summary of the magazines. The reason is that the editor, Mr. Ellery Sidgwick, after many requests, has persistently refused to supply, as all the other editors do, copies of the magazine for the purpose. He was urged to this, he claimed, in reducing his complimentary list, yet I know of complimentary copies going to men who are dead. I merely state this in answer to the numerous inquiries I have received, and to maintain my position of strict impartiality which I have endeavored to make a virtue in this work. To treat poetry with the seriousness that I have attempted in this work, not only in the anthology, but in the yearbook features, is an innovation that some publishers do not regard with consideration and take full advantage of. With few exceptions, the assistance has not been voluntary, as their habit is with other kinds of literature, and I have found difficulties in making my records and reviews as complete as I would like, and as it is important to make them. From individuals as well as publishers, I would like to receive during the year all information about books of poems, books about poets and poetry, and the volumes upon publication. These must be sent direct to my address, 27 Ellsworth Avenue, Cambridge, Massachusetts. To the following publishers I am indebted for permission to use selections chosen from the magazines, and which they are issuing in book form for the poets. The Macmillan Company, Sunset Balconies in the Pilgrim Kings, Greco and Goya and Other Poems of Spain, by Thomas Walsh. Joy, the Cloud, Testament, and the Answer, in Rivers to the Sea, by Sarah Teasdale. Hannah Armstrong and Washington McNeely, in Spoon River Anthology, by Edgar Lee Masters. Mitchell Kennerly, La Gitana in Processionals, by John Curtis Underwood. Prayer for Peace, in Prayer for Peace and Other Poems, by William Samuel Johnson. Passages from a Poem, The New World, in The New World, by Witter Benner. Upton Mifflin Company, Sea Iris, by H.D., in Some Images Poets, an Anthology. The Bombardment, by Amy Lowell, in Some Images Poets, an Anthology. The Barbary Bush, in Afternoons of April, by Grace Hazard Conkling. Harper and Brothers, Gay Heart, A Story of Defeat, in Poems, by Dana Burnett. Yale University Press, The Maker of Images, in Poems, by Brian Hooker. Henry Holt and Company, The Death of the Hired Man, in North of Boston, by Robert Frost. John Lane Company, For the Dedication of a Toy Theater in the House That Was, by Benjamin R. C. Lowe. The John C. Winston Company, A Cyprian Woman, Greek Folk Song, and God and the Strong Ones, in the Factories and Other Poems, by Margaret Whittemer. Sherman French and Company, A Statue in a Garden, in the Sharing, by Agnes Lee. End of introduction.